Welcome to Trail Nutz, the podcast about real stories from real riders about real trails. I'm your host, Mark. Mountain biking has a way of teaching us to adapt to the terrain, the weather. Sometimes there's challenges we never saw coming. Today's guest, Jen, doesn't just embody that, she redefines it. As an adaptive mountain bike rider, Jen's journey is all about resilience and innovation and a deep love for the trails. Jen, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Jen, just to get us started, maybe give us a little bit of your story just to kick off the conversation, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I started mountain biking, specifically adaptive biking, in 2022. Before that, I did do a little bit of cycling here and there, nothing serious. No real mountain bike trails per se. But in 2021, I had a spinal cord injury. And my main activity before that was trail running. So that was pretty much my whole social connection. So my weekends pretty much revolved around races, just getting together with friends and, doing stupid stuff, 24 hours in the bush kind of thing. So in 2021, after that injury, I just didn't have the same ways to get outside. So I tried a few different things, but really it wasn't sort of letting me keep up with my friends. So one of the first things that I did was I bought like a sort of rugged outdoor wheelchair, and it was so brutal to push this thing. Like it just wasn't going to happen. So eventually I actually ended up getting into adaptive biking kind of as a joke. So someone had sent me a link to this person just bombing down this mountain on this adaptive bike. And they sent me this video and said, "Look, it's you." And I remember showing my husband, and he looked at me and he was like, "Absolutely not." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a challenge." So that's kind of how I got into it. I did actually end up going to a women's training course that was for 3 days over a long weekend. And that's kind of how I got into it.
So once you discovered that there was this training course, what did that look like for you? What was that path? What resources were available to you?
So there's not actually a whole lot in Ontario right now. Before I found that course being offered, I actually did do a demo day at the cycling center in Milton. So they have a paracycling program, but their training programs are sort of geared towards people who want to become Paralympians, which is not in the cards for me. So initially the experience that I had there, it just wasn't the greatest fit for me. And I ended up finding out about this camp. It was actually on Instagram that I saw it advertised. And it was a weekend event that basically I had to figure out how to fly myself out to Alberta, which this was actually my first trip post-injury by myself. So that was kind of a big deal in and of itself, just kind of getting ready to go somewhere, not really knowing anybody out there. But it turned out to be like the best adventure ever.
And tell me, so the course, who organizes it? Is there an association? Is there a program behind it?
Yeah. So the group that course was through is called Rocky Mountain Adaptive. And it's just such a cool program that they have. They're in Canmore. And they do adaptive mountain biking and kayaking, hiking, a whole bunch of outdoor activities. And basically they have this like whole staff who will take people out on adventures. So it was run through them, and it was at the Nordic Center in Canmore. And then there's sort of a tight-knit community in the adaptive mountain biking group. So it was actually this awesome person who's come to be a friend of mine. Her name's Sierra Roth, and she's one of the best adaptive female mountain bike riders out there. There's a couple of people riding at a fairly high level out west as well as in the States. But it was through that program that I got coached and learned how to ride.
Nice. And so I imagine that's very fulfilling, being able to get back out in the trails and enjoying something that you like. You seem to enjoy being out in the wilderness, in the trails. So tell me, after you took that course, you came back to Ontario. What have you found as far as availability here?
It's non-existent. Well, not anymore. It was non-existent. So when I came home after that course, I just knew that I had to figure out a way to do this. And, also to be able to have other people get outdoors. Because one of the things that bothers me about adaptive mountain biking is that it's just so expensive and it's not accessible to everyone. So it's really, acknowledging sort of coming from a place of privilege that I could travel to go to a course like that, to have the resource to do that. And of course, there's programs out there like you can get some scholarship and funding for different adaptive sports, but it's still a big endeavor. So for about 2 years now, I've been working towards trying to build a program in Ontario with a few of the people that I ride with. And part of that process was a few of us becoming adaptive mountain bike coaches, which happened this past summer. So things are just sort of starting to get established here.
So getting that established, are we talking about working with municipal governments, with provincial governments? Are we in at that level? Who are we talking with to try to get those established?
So we're not really there yet. So what I'm trying to do is I'm running a camp as a pilot. So it'll be the first adaptive camp in Ontario. And I'm running it in collaboration with the Hand Cycling Club of Canada. And just sort of working with some of the connections there to get an event like that sanctioned by the Hand Cycling Club and then sanctioned by Ontario Cycling is actually really big progress for us. Because sometimes with adaptive bikes, you have to be respectful of landowner agreements, and sometimes there's issues with access because, whether or not it's like the physically built trail or, if it's a place that doesn't technically allow e-bikes to ride, then oftentimes we have to sort of advocate for that access and, talk to the people and say like this, it's a mobility aid, right? It's a bike. We're going to ride respectfully, but we need to have access to be able to get out and have some fun.
Yeah. Tell me about the trails you have access to. I know of at least one event that has an adaptive mountain bike category, but what other trails are out there and what events do you find yourself attending?
So for me, the awesome thing about my bike is that it can pretty much access, more than 90% of what a regular upright two-wheeled mountain bike can access. So the width of the bike is 29 inches, which is like average handlebar width. So a lot of times people will sort of ask like, are there specific trails that you can go on? I would say the only thing that I don't go on is anything with a huge drop or big gap jumps. The rest of it is pretty much fair game as long as you have one or two support riders. And obviously it just depends on sort of where you're at. So in the beginning, I rode mostly just around my neighborhood on like community bike paths. And then most of the training that I did wasn't local. So I attended a couple of different training sessions out in Squamish and here locally ride at the Hydrocut as well as the Woodstock Pines. So, pretty much can access almost anything.
Very nice. Very nice. Tell me a bit more about the equipment and the bike. Tell me what are the things you're looking for or what's available to you?
So I ride a Bowhead Reach, which is a throttle bike. It doesn't actually have hand cranks. And the premise behind this bike is that the owner and, the mastermind behind it, he created this bike so that people could get out in places that other mobility equipment doesn't go. So you can literally ride this thing up the side of a mountain and down the other side of the mountain. So the bike that I ride has 2 wheels up front and 1 wheel in the back. So that's called a tadpole style of bike. And there's different styles. You can get bikes with 1 wheel in the front and 2 in the back. Different suspension setups. Some of them are wider, have a wider wheelbase at the back. But the Reach, the really unique thing about it is on the front, there's like a parallelogram shape and both wheels articulate independently. So it's a pretty unique piece of equipment. And then I've been riding that bike for 2 years. And this past summer, I got one of their other bikes. It's called the Bowhead RX. And that one actually is a hand crank bike, but it's e-assist. And it also still has the articulation on the front. So that's kind of like your gravel / enduro bike, whereas the Reach is more like your downhill kind of bike.
And is there a wide range of products and options available? Is it what is that like as far as the ecosystem?
Yeah. So there's actually a few different companies out there. I would say that Bowhead is pretty popular in Canada because they're a Calgary-based company. And they also have a couple different models of bikes. They actually have 3. So they've got the 2 that I have, and then they've got another bike called the Rogue. and that one is kind of like a gravel trail bike. It doesn't have quite as much suspension, but that one can also be sized for kids, which is really unique. And then there's a handful of other companies out there. There's a company called Sport On, and they make these bikes that are more of like a prone style bike that you have your legs in like foot trays kind of, and you're kneeling over top of it. Whereas my bike, my legs are out in front of me and I'm kind of seated upright. And with that, you can see everything, which, is nice. With some of the other bikes, you're facing down, so you don't quite get as much of the view up here. And I think, people are going to choose different bikes depending on what their needs are and, also maybe what's close to them. So, there's a couple companies in the States, one out of Las Vegas called Lasher. And there's one called Reactive Adaptations that makes a bunch of bikes. So I think it just depends on the person and maybe what training program they go to, what's available to try. But that's also, one of the limitations is that sometimes you don't get to try all of these bikes before you buy one. You might just end up getting what you know versus being able to try a bunch of different ones.
Right. They're not readily available. Like you don't have a bike shop. You're probably working online, getting them custom kind of fit and tailored to your needs, I'd imagine.
For sure.
Back to the question around the trails and the events. Are there any unique events that support adaptive mountain biking in around the area?
So one of the ones actually is the race at Albion Hills every year, Chico Racing. That one has been around for a long time. I actually saw your podcast on that one with Adam, I think you did it with. And
yes.
They've been really, really supportive of the hand cycling club. And they've been doing it for years and years. So I actually just joined that group 2 years ago and showed up and, met this huge group of guys that I was able to ride with again this year and have become friends with most of them. But they've been super supportive in that event, just looking for, trail access where all of the bikes can fit and having like ride arounds as well, where, if there's a section that you don't want to do because, say like you just don't like that section or it's not great for your bike or you don't want to hold people up, like that's always, kind of a concern when you're on the trails. So sometimes just take a little shortcut around, but they've been, they've been super accommodating as well.
Are there any others in Ontario that you're aware of?
So race-wise, I actually did just start riding quite a bit at the Woodstock Pines this summer, and they've been super supportive as well with their trail building and with their events. So I got to participate in their dual slalom this summer, which was pretty cool. And then there's going to be a few more things kind of coming in Ontario. I've approached Substance Projects before to get them to adapt one of their courses, and they did. It was the Fat Bike Race last year, which actually we didn't have enough snow the weekend that we were supposed to do it. So it didn't actually end up going, but pretty much everybody that I've approached about it, is really willing to do that. It's just there's not a lot of us out there yet, so it's not something that's automatically done unless you sort of make yourself known.
There, I think in any group there's a huge component of self-advocacy. So I think that's important. I really enjoy hearing that it's been receptive, the folks you have approached. I did enjoy that part of the conversation with Adam from Chico Racing at the 24-hour event. I know that his registration just opened up about 3 weeks ago, so yeah. I know I'm registered. Hopefully we'll see you there as well.
Oh yeah, there'll be a huge group.
I'm wondering if maybe you could share, is there something that you wish people knew about adaptive mountain biking that maybe they wouldn't know or wouldn't assume?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, people don't recognize is they think that everything's a limitation. It's like, well, I don't know if your bike will go there. So generally the first time when I ride with someone, they'll kind of look at the bike and look at me and it's like, I don't know if that trail's going to work. And I'm like, let's try it. Like I can pretty much get on anything that I want. I know what my abilities are and, don't just judge because I have this bike that I can't go somewhere. Now, obviously I'm not going to be reckless with that either. I'm going to look up on trail forks and look at some pictures of the trail and talk to people and that sort of thing. But I think that's one of the primary assumptions that I find is that people just think that your bike isn't going to go somewhere. So they kind of limit you before you even start.
Right. How about things that you didn't know that you'd have to deal with as you got into adaptive mountain biking? Was there anything that you were like, well, I didn't expect this, or I didn't expect this kind of freedom, maybe?
I mean, I think the freedom part is a huge thing. That's what initially drew me to it, is you pretty much on that bike have the ability to get somewhere that you're never going to get in a wheelchair or with a mobility device. So, that's what the draw is. Like, before, when I was doing activities outside, it was like I could just do whatever I want whenever I wanted. I didn't have to think much about it. It was like, oh, I want to go to this event. Sure, run upstairs, grab your stuff and go. Now everything is very planned. So there's no such thing as last minute going for a ride, right? Everything takes a lot of time to prepare. I think maybe in the beginning that's, something that I had to get used to, or didn't really, understand how long it would take to do everything. But yeah, I'd say that's one of the main things.
Just the planning of things out, the logistics thereof.
Yeah, and even also like being dependent on a support rider, right? So there are some people who ride alone. I only ride alone if it's just a little community ride, or if it's somewhere I'm really familiar with. Like sometimes I'll go to Huron Natural Area, which isn't far from me. But if I'm out on the trails, I generally have to organize ahead of time and ask someone to come, which means if they can't go, I can't go. So that's a big thing about having access to the trails, is just, one of the best parts of this summer for me riding at the Pines was these two awesome trail builders. Like we had a standing date every weekend. They're like, hey, we're here every weekend. Just, text us, we'll be ready. And that resulted in me being able to go, almost every weekend versus, sometimes if you don't have someone, you're just kind of like, you feel like you have to poke people like, hey, do you want to go for a ride? But you also don't want them to feel like they have to say yes. So it's just a little bit of a weird dynamic there, like trying to get things set up to go.
Right. Group riding is such a big aspect, I think, of mountain biking. I think that's what keeps drawing people back in. Like it sort of is a solo sport, but it's a very social community sport. So it's great to hear that is a big part for you as well. I know you touched on, you don't want people to assume anything about limitations of your bike, but I'm wondering, if you could design the perfect trail for your bike, what would some of those elements be?
I mean, I like a little bit of everything. I really like flow trails. I like riding stuff sometimes that I don't have to think that much about. So, it depends on the day. I think it's like everyone who rides. Some days you want to do tech stuff, you want to go out and, do something super specific. But, trails for us, some of the things that are barriers are things that you wouldn't think of. So, like even just having a rock feature in the middle of a trail. For us, that's a barrier versus it being something that we can just sort of launch our bike off. So I'd say just, having trails where if there's something that doesn't work for us, it's usually just a minor tweak. We don't want paved pathways, right? Like the whole point of being able to get on an adaptive bike is we want to ride the same trails. We don't want dumbed down trails that are easy just because we ride an adaptive bike.
Like maybe we don't want the giant boulder in the middle of the trail.
Yeah.
I don't want a giant boulder in the middle of the trail either. So like we share that.
Yeah.
What is the next phase of this in Ontario? Because you're talking about basically doing some advocacy, getting some events. What would you like to see over the next couple of years? What does good look like for you?
I think access is the biggest thing. So there's a couple of groups right now in Ontario that are trying to sort of pull things together. And, we have to lay the groundwork for this. It's not just something that we can pop up an adaptive bike program overnight, because the equipment costs are very high. There's issues with insurance. But what we'd like to see happen is having a place where people can go and try different bikes, right? Being able to find out, like, you have to do a lot of digging to find out where these organizations are. One of the awesome things is on the Hand Cycling Club of Canada webpage, there's a map right on the main page, and you can find a rider or find a trail. So I would actually suggest that people kind of go to that and use that to find people that are local to them. And then, we'd like to see starting to include adaptive riders in races. So that's, again, us making those connections with different groups and going out and saying, hey, we're going to bring 3 adaptive riders to this. This is what it looks like. Could you, include us in the planning of the route, have us come out and pre-ride, that sort of thing. And I think, the camp is a big thing to sort of pave the way for people to just try this. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to want to ride just to get out in their community. Some people are going to want to ride the trails and crush it. It's just having that choice, being able to get out there. And the biggest limitation right now is just that it doesn't exist. We don't have the equipment and we don't have the programs.
What advice would you have for somebody that may be listening along or that's out there and thinks, gee, I wish I knew how to get into this?
So most of the information you're going to find is social media. There's actually a pretty tight-knit group of people who are in the adaptive biking community who are more than happy to share resources. Sometimes people will reach out. I have an Instagram page called Ontario Adaptive Riders. There's, again, also the Hand Cycling Club. And if you reach out on those and you basically just say, hey, I'm interested in this, can you tell me about it? Generally, somebody's going to offer, hey, do you want to meet up and maybe try my bike, do a demo, that sort of thing.
Good, very good. How about beyond social media? You've mentioned a couple of times the Hand Cycling Association of Canada. What kind of resources do they have for people that need more information to get started?
So they have that map on their website where you can find people. I would say one of their biggest events in the year is the 24-hour event. So with that, again, the barrier is having equipment, as most people don't just own an adaptive bike. So one of the things that we're working on through that Hand Cycling Club of Canada and through Ontario Adaptive Riders, as well as a couple of friends that I've got over Ottawa area, we're trying to get some grants for a program bike where we could have access to a bike that could be shared in the province. There's a couple of things sort of going on with Hand Cycling Club and, maybe collaborating with Parasport Ontario or some of the other organizations to develop a trailer model where we have a trailer with a few different types of bikes that people could try. And then one of the other things that's available is there's actually an adaptive bike hub in Hamilton. And it's run out of Gage Park. Now, that's not specifically mountain biking, but they do have a couple of recumbent hand cycles, a tricycle, and a cargo bike. So that's more sort of just like leisure if you want to get out to the park. But that's a good place to start where you could actually get in a couple of different bikes and try them out.
Very good. Very nice. I'm wondering, I have a couple of sort of closing questions for you. The first one I'll ask is, if you could pick anywhere in the world to go and ride, where would that be?
Ooh, there's so many options. I really like riding out west, so I've rode in Squamish a couple of times. I'm going to say I want to go ride out in Whistler. And I think I put that on my list for this summer, so it might not be on my dream list much longer. I might actually get to go do it. So, yeah.
I think for many mountain bikers, Whistler's like the mecca of mountain biking. I was fortunate enough. I was there in September. I got to ride.
Nice.
It was a lot of fun. So I highly recommend riding Whistler to say that you get that Canadian mountain bike check mark.
Yeah, we're trying to actually put a team together for Crankworks for next year.
That would be a lot of fun. Yeah. It's just a crazy place. I think what other questions we haven't touched upon. I think we've touched on a number of things. Jen, I find this conversation really enriching, getting some more knowledge around what adaptive mountain biking is all about some of the challenges you're seeing around access, around making sure that you have access to the bikes, the equipment, the trail access, all these sort of things. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I'm hoping that people are listening along. If you're an event organizer, I'm sure Jen would love a reach out to see how we may be able to get some adaptive mountain biking features in your events. I know at the 24-hour event, it's very seamless. We're just all out there having a good time on the trails, and I'd love to see that stuff. Jen, maybe remind us one more time. You mentioned your Instagram handle at least once, but just in closing, what was that Instagram handle they can follow you on?
So my personal Instagram is bionic O_Heart_roller. And then the other one is Ontario Adaptive Riders, which is ON_AMBT_riders. I think I did those right.
We'll get them tagged when we get the episode posted. Big thanks to Jen for sharing your story with us today. Remember, it's not just about the trails, it's about the ride, it's about the people who make it special. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a follow on whatever social platform you found us on. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, maybe on Amazon Prime in the near future if I can figure it out. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.